Theme song for the Gear Podcast. Welcome, everybody. We're back for another episode. I'm in a good mood today, but I just wasn't feeling like blowing the mic out. So sorry, everybody.
Is that a reflection of your enthusiasm for the guest today?
It's the opposite of. I'm always very excited to talk to Mr. Jason Tong, all the way from the East Coast, West Coast, but we don't hold that against him. Although you're both over there at the moment, so what can I say?
Yeah, Leon's honorary over East. Right?
Yeah, 2 against 1, bro. So Jason, we just figured out it's been over a year since we first had you on the podcast. The Marshall Whisperer himself. How's life, mate? What's changed since we spoke to you last?
Oh yeah, look, quite a lot. I think. I reckon when we spoke last time, I was still gainfully employed in my day job.
Yep.
I had gone down to 4 days a week with that old, in the old world, and was devoting 3 days a week to Headfirst, and I was on the, I guess looking at, life, what life would be like after I finished up, because by then I'd already kind of worked things out with work, and I was going to finish up, and I finished up in the middle of June last year. So I've gone through that anniversary and been doing this full time for over a year now, and I went to the States in the last 2 weeks of May last year and did the same thing last 2 weeks of May this year as well. So a lot has happened since we spoke last. That's for sure.
Far out, man. How many amps do you think, 1, you've built, and 2, you've modified since we spoke to you last time?
Yeah, look, that's a really interesting question, actually.
Well, there's one for me, one for Leon, so there's 2.
Yep. Yeah, at least 2. The mod stuff is interesting. Like, it's almost everyone I know in this game still mods as well, so Dave Freeman, Kyle Rhodes. I do definitely want to talk about what's happening with KSR as well, because Kyle is a really important part of over the last year. Obviously Shay, my buddy in Indiana, with Monomyth, and I do. It's great to take mods in to fill in work in between production builds, which tend to happen mainly because of supply chain. It tends to happen in batches or runs. You do like a run of 10 or a run of 12 or 6 or whatever, some number where you kind of batch things up and then just basically go into a hole and just get these builds done. But in between things, the modding stuff is really great because it keeps the work flowing. But man, it's essential R&D. You discover things from like tinkering with an amp that you just wouldn't necessarily do if you're just sitting there, and dreaming up circuits and testing things in isolation, of actually starting with an existing working amplifier and then trying to make it into something different. To the extent where I've even got into modding dual rectifiers in the last about 6 months ago. I've actually bought one, and I haven't published anything about that. Still don't know if I will, but it was I wanted obviously known as being a Marshall guy, but I wanted to cross into that into that other land, and I was curious about obviously the construction method and the engineering that's in those amps, which notoriously, if you watch any of the tech repair kind of channels and stuff, they get shit canned a lot for their construction method. Look, I didn't find it too bad, to be honest. I thought the dual rectifier was a little bit hard to trace out and understand, but from an engineering perspective, quite clever.
Yeah. Which one did you buy? A 3-channel or a 2-channel?
It's a 3-channel solo. Just before would have been just before the multi-watt.
Oh yeah, that's the same one I've got then, I think.
Yeah, and you can see, it's kind of probably widely known, but you can see the DNA back to the SLO 100 is just so evident Like, there's differences for sure, and some quite clever differences, but the preamp is pretty similar. But maybe I'll talk a little bit about what's been going on with the actual kind of production side of things. I never answered your question, Leon. Probably, look, on the ALTA, you asked about numbers. The ALTA 100, we've done about 50 of those.
That's awesome, man.
Awesome.
Yeah. And they're all built here. The first, in terms of the US market, this is something that's really kind of often misunderstood, so I might take a moment to clarify this. Right at the beginning of the release of that amp, which is kind of maybe just before we spoke. I think by that stage, Leon
last year.
and Troy, I'd sent one of these, my one sitting up there, but I'd sent one over to you to demo, right, Leon? And you guys,
it was our first
Troy,
podcast.
you checked it out as well.
Yeah, we discussed it. I think we played it and then we recorded. It was
That's
the
right.
only time we've done one in person. Is that right?
That's correct.
I thought we were going to do another
right.
one in person, but I think that's the only one.
Right.
Anyway,
I can remember that. Actually, yeah, that was your very, very first one. That's right.
Yep.
So that, I'm going to go all over the place here, guys. So you have to
Go nuts,
No,
man.
you-
This is what we
Free
do.
reign.
that actual amplifier, the one that went over to Perth and came back again, is now owned by Jim Root.
Oh, wicked.
Yeah.
Tell him I want it back.
Yeah, it's a great sounding amp, bro. It's a loud
one that-
monster.
So when they came, I'll tell the story quickly, but when it was probably around about the time we did the Gear podcast that I was on, I think around about that time, Slipknot came to Australia for Knotfest. Well, they only played the East Coast, but they did Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. Mike Smith, who is the owner and founder of Omega amps, so they have the Granifier and the Obsidian.
Yep.
Mike is an awesome dude. I've had him on my channel for a live stream, I don't know, sometime last year. He's the guitar tech for Mick Thompson.
Oh, okay.
Right.
The other guy with the hockey mask, has been for quite a long time. Mick plays Obsidians in his rack. And I'd had a lot of contact with Mike. Mike was talking to me about doing some engineering work for his company. That kind of never happened, but it's just, it was how we kind of made contact, and we just kept a conversation going all the time. And he emailed me the week that they were coming to Australia and said, "Hey, I'm coming down with the band. We should catch up." I'm like, "Hell yeah, that'd be awesome." So we'd arranged to kind of meet for pizza and a couple of beers or whatever for lunch on the Wednesday, and the Knotfest festival was on the Friday. So they flew in a couple of days because Melbourne was the first date of the Australian leg. They had a couple of days to kill before show day, which is great. Worked out great because then I got to kind of have some time with the crew, And I met Bob Strakel, who does front of house sound for Slipknot, and he does Avenged Sevenfold as well. Bob's an amp builder.
All right.
So yeah, like a hobbyist, if you like, but I think he's pretty serious about it. Like every time he's home, he's got a head in his amp and he's building stuff. More of a kind of train wreck kind of vibe, Bob does. But so I met the guys for lunch, but on that morning, Mike messaged me on Facebook and he goes, "Have you got one of your amps there to bring in?" And I'm like thinking to myself, "We're just going to the lunch. What the hell?" So I said to him, "Why?" And he said, "Well, Jim wants to try it." I'm like, "What?" So he had actually said to Jim earlier that day, he said, "Hey, there's this guy in Melbourne that's just released this amp. I think you should try it." Jim's like, "Who is it? What company?" He said, "You never heard of them. Don't worry about it. I'm just going to but if you're interested, I'll get one and you can try it out." So that was my actual amp, my serial number 0, my personal one. I took it in and gave it to Mike. He put it in his hotel room, and I never saw it again because on Friday morning at Flemington at the showgrounds, Jim tried the amp and loved it. And so I got this message from Mike, and he said, "I'm standing in the room with Jim right now. He's playing your amp. He loves it. He wants to know how much." I'm like, this is a question. These are questions that you want to get, but you don't know how to answer.
Yeah, exactly.
So I said, you can have it for free if he's cool to do some promotion with it. And I'm waiting and waiting. You know, on Messenger, you get the three dots go like this, you know, and he's typing. I'm on the train on the way out to Flemington at this moment because Mike had got me on the guest list, and he actually got me backstage that day and everything. It was awesome.
Hell yeah.
But he came back and he said, no. He said he's Jim's okay to do promo with it, but he wants to buy the amp. He wants to pay for it. Yeah, so he's super nice dude. Awesome guy. And he has three now.
Three ALTAs, or he's got the 50.
Yeah,
50
three
well?
ALTAs.
Right.
Yeah, two 100s, and then I did a custom 50-watt one for him in a 22-inch, because the ALTA is a standard Marshall small box size head shelves, 26 inches wide.
Yep.
And which is fine for his live racks, but they have a rehearsal rack, or they call it the jam room rack. Mm-hmm. So when they tour, all the guys have cut down rigs that the crew set up in a warm up room backstage, and they can go in and like drum kit everything, and they go in and play and get kind of warmed up before they then hit the stage. Because often I don't believe the band sound checks. Right, the crew sound checks, and the band will just come on and play, but they'll warm up, backstage. And that's pretty cool in a jam room. So he wanted a smaller head, which is where that 50-watt one-off custom came from.
That's awesome.
So that whole connection with Jim's been awesome, because that obviously has been really important for the growth of the brand since we last spoke.
Yeah.
And you also made an amp for Joe Barresi.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
Which is pretty rad.
Yeah, Joe Barresi. So he is such a nice guy. Jeez. I've been to Joe's studio twice now.
That's awesome. Place is like, I've only seen pictures and videos, but that place is like Candyland. That's, I'd love to spend about 8 hours hanging out.
I look at that. Yeah, there's so much gear in there, Troy, that I don't even know what it does.
Yeah.
It's just, like in his live room, I understand everything that's in his live room, because it's basically, it's more amplifier heads and cabinets that you've ever seen in your life in one room.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's not ridiculous. It's awesome. It's insane, because he's all about, and Troy, you'll understand this, more than anybody. He said to me, these are all tools.
Yeah.
Like, I'm here to deliver sound and create sounds. We had this conversation about, how he goes about that. The first time I was there, I ended up spending probably 2.5, nearly 3 days with him. It was amazing. And in his, because his studio is called Joe's House of Compression, is what he said. It's just an unmarked building in Pasadena. You'd never know. You'd never find this thing. Mm-hmm. It's like just a nondescript building. You would never know. But he's been in there a long time, and he's accumulated just everything. And we spent most of the day just playing through amps. Mm-hmm. You just keep pulling amps off the shelf, and let's try this one. Let's try this one. He's all about being able to create sounds that no one else has got.
Yep.
That's awesome.
We spent a lot of time talking about that. And so all of this analog gear, he describes as tools to do that. I even asked him, we waded into areas that I don't know much about, but, in terms of like in the box, out of the box, all this kind of stuff.
Yep.
He'll use in the box stuff when he, kind of for convenience, but he's pretty cautious that he goes, I don't want to use the same modules, presets, and digital devices that everyone else has got, because then they'll just sound the same.
Yep. Yeah, totally.
It's also part of the experience. Like, when you're known as the Joe Barresi and people come and record with you, they want the Joe Barresi experience,
Yeah.
Like Troy, we talked about this a while ago. It's like why you've got all the amps there as well, because, you can only get your pink recto in your studio. You can only your old Headfirst modded Marshall sounds like your old Headfirst modded Marshall. It's part of the, like capturing a moment in time, creating an experience for people. And Chris Baseford said the same thing, right?
Yeah, totally. I think for the stuff that I have, it's funnily enough, it's almost the opposite to start, in that sometimes people come in and they want a specific sound, and I have to have that covered first and foremost, so that and stuff that like is, you just need that sort of clean Fender sound or that AC30 sound. It's like, great, I've got the amp band, pull it out, no worries. Interestingly enough, like there's been a few things that I've come across and I've started to buy, like the more unique stuff, and that's where I need to try and move my stuff, because with like fractals and Kempers and Tonex and all this sort of stuff, it's the same sound. Like it is identically the same sound. Bam, 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 bam. That's awesome as a tool. I guess in terms of driving like the idea of a part, not driving forward the sonic, progression of music. Those are two different sort of things. Joe's like, in terms of like, I've watched interviews, I've listened to interviews with him. He seems so obsessive, and in a way that I wish I had time to do a lot of the time. Like, I know he's a super busy guy. It's just like, he said one time, he's like, I'm just going to sit here and swap pickups for like a day. And that sort of stuff. Yep. And I lose patience. My patience with that stuff a lot,
It's super fascinating seeing him in his element there. Yeah. I mean, I've never sat there and, had the experience of him working with an artist and recording and all that, but I've seen him in there tinkering with stuff and and we talked a lot about, about those kind of motivators for, he likes to understand how things work to a level, which is why, that's how that whole connection happened, Leon, back to the whole, your thing about Joe Barresi started with him messaging me on Instagram. I got this direct DM, and it was a guy asking about Jose mods, and I'm like, oh God, here we go again, Every day I get a bloody email from someone wanting free advice about how to mod their bloody amp, and it's crazy. I tell you, it's nuts. And I was like, oh, here we go, another one. And then it was
I know this name.
Yes. And I looked at the thing, it was Evil Joe Barresi, and I went, oh, no, can't be. And then, of course, I went and looked at his profile, and it's absolutely him, I was like, oh, shit. So, of course, I was very helpful. and we ended up having, it's just the messages went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then eventually he said, and he'd actually built, so back to kind of, and this is a real window into what, how he works, right? How his mind works. He built 100-watt plexi from a Mojo Tone kit.
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow.
And got it working. The amp was working, and I actually got to work on the amp when I went there. I did some stuff for him when I was actually there last year. Perfect. Like, he'd built it to a great standard from the kit. And the reason he did it is because he wanted to understand more about how tube amps work, because he obviously understands, and I agree with him, that there's a connection between having a bit of knowledge about how something is working and then being able to extract sounds because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like, Leon, it's like your video on the Mark Series amp and understanding where the tone stack is, and then you can apply that to how to dial it in, with some little bit of science as well as using your ears. He's all about that. And once he had the Mojo Tone kit working, it's just a stock 100-watt plexi, right? It's, as we all know, an awesome sounding thing, but pretty inflexible. Mm-hmm. It's like, what do you do with this thing? I mean, in his setup, you could run it flat out, no problem, right? But it's just going to do one thing, and he wants to. Again, he doesn't want to have an amp that sounds the same as everyone else has got.
Yeah, absolutely.
He wants something that can, maybe got something unique about it. So he's in there tinkering with it, adding switches and blah, blah, blah. And he'd stumbled upon my channel. And he was like, "Oh, I saw you do this, blah blah blah. You know what? How? You know, but I didn't understand this last part or whatever." So that led to this conversation, and then he eventually said, "You should just build me an amp." So that's the thing that became the one-off Evil Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And if anyone who's listening to this hasn't heard the story about how he got his nickname, I won't tell you because it takes too long.
Yeah.
But you can Google it and you'll see he's actually told the story about how he got his name. And it relates back to a prank.
Yeah.
It's hilarious, a prank phone call that a guy did. And the guy that did it, he didn't do it with Joe Barresi in mind, right? It's just through a series of steps it became connected to Joe.
Yeah.
So Evil Joe is his nickname, and he's even been credited on, he's got production credits on albums where it says Evil Joe Barresi.
Yeah.
So
Interestingly,
the amp became known as...
I was going to say quickly, that story, I first heard that on the Racer X forum in 2005.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. Because that was on because I used to be on the forum. I was really active on that forum 15, 20 years ago. But the main page, Spandex Man, that was me. But yeah,
that's killer, Troy.
Yeah, the main page, man, that was on there for some reason.
Here's the connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a guy called Craig Martini played bass with Paul Gilbert.
Okay.
You look him up. He's a killer bass player.
In what era? I used to be the number one Paul Gilbert man in Perth, Western Australia. In Australia, I was obsessed. I have
come on, in the Southern Hemisphere.
I have every solo album up until about 2008, everything I could find. And this is back in...
Yeah.
I spent 3 days, the only time I ever used Emule to pirate something because it was the only place I could find it. Because this is a real tangent. There's a video...
No, I get it, man.
It was Paul Gilbert, Nuno Betancourt, all these dudes.
John Paul Jones.
Yeah, it was this Guitar Wars thing. I could not pirate it anywhere apart from Emule. It took 3 days to download it. And I'm sure it's on YouTube now. Anyway, so go on.
Understandably so. So the connection there, the Racer X connection, is that so this guy Craig who played with Paul, and I don't know what era, but
I'll have to look him up. Yeah,
his brother is Mike Martini. Mike was the guy that did the prank call.
Okay, right.
Mike has actually released. He's released albums and stuff with his comedy on it. There's a piece of vinyl sitting right there.
Mm-hmm.
Mike actually sent me that. That's one of his albums, and it's called Original Prankster.
Right. Okay.
And he just does this he's actually a tattoo artist, right, by trade, or whatever, right? But he does this comedy stuff for a laugh, and it's hilarious. And one of the calls, obviously, is where the Evil Joe thing came from, and Mike's a guitar player himself.
Mm-hmm.
So with the Evil Joe, I think by the time this podcast comes out, I would have this will now be news, so I'll talk about it now. But we got a scoop. That's my next amp. My next production amp is the Evil Joe.
Yeah.
Awesome.
50 watter. And if you look anyone can go and have a look on Joe's Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
He's actually posted a photo of his original, the custom Evil Joe that was done about 18 months ago. And then the production, he's got serial number 2, because I built 3 of them when I was in the States a couple of weeks ago.
Right, okay.
In Shay's workshop. One went to Mike Martini himself, the guy that did the call.
Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And so Joe and I went in, we bought that for him as a,
oh, that's cool.
Just as something cool to do, give me something back, right? And that dude, he's such an awesome guy and just so blown away by the gesture and loves the amp. He's now got it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next 2, Joe himself took. And then so next week, all going well, I'm basically putting the rest, putting the amp out for purchase, basically.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
It looks like this.
Oh, one I prepared earlier.
This one's out of its head shell, but you'll get the idea.
All right.
Let me try and put the thing.
Sweet. Can you tell us a bit about what it does, what it sounds like? It's based on your Cali, is that right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a gain monster, so you guys will hate it.
Yeah, it's only Fender Tweeds for me.
Yeah. It's all it's nothing like that. It is based. It's originated from that Cali circuit, which originated from the. I don't want to say Jose mod because that's so confusing. Because there's so many different ones, I guess. But it is. What's the easiest way to explain it? If anyone watches Pete Thorne's channel and has seen. He did amps in the zone, the Steve Vai amp.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yep.
That particular Jose, which was the real high gain shredder amp, that Cali circuit kind of is in that ballpark, in that DNA.
Yep.
Right.
This is different than that, but it definitely came from that because that's the custom amp for Joe that was done 18 months ago started from there, and then we built it into something, from that starting point. This amp's been completely reworked to be a production amp rather than a one-off custom build, and the circuit has changed a bit. And it's got a bunch of it's a bit more kind of user-friendly, I guess, in terms of dialing it in and using it. But it's just a 2-channel, non-MIDI, straight down the middle, like, I guess, regular kind of TRS switching. So it's not as fully featured as the ALTA, but it's also not trying to sit in exactly the same spot in terms of product.
And obviously 50 watts as well versus the Altas are 100.
It's 50 rather than 100. You can actually set it up so it's got 2 channels, evil and darkness.
So good.
The names of the channel.
Yeah.
The evil channel can be set up as a full-on gain channel. So you could have 2 channels of gain and dial them in differently and at different volumes because each channel has independent gain and volume. Or you can actually assign the evil channel into a clean channel and have that kind of so you can set the amp up with clean and a dirty or dirty and even more dirty. And then it's got a front end. It's got a front end boost built into it. So in terms of the foot switching, it's a 2-button foot switch, so you can select the channels, but you can also hit this boost in front. You should not need to run a boost pedal with this amp. You could, and some people will.
I look forward to all the videos
that will.
Yeah. I look forward to all the videos where it's like, cool, all right, so here's 3 seconds of riffs. Now let's put a tube screamer in front of it.
Yes.
Because
let's talk about that for a second. Why?
Boost culture, bro. Boost culture. Modded Marshall culture.
Yep.
John Mayer cosplay culture. Petrucci simp culture and boost culture. That's all the YouTube is these days, right? Like,
dude, it's a good way to describe it. It is. Yeah.
That's a long and different conversation that maybe so I don't get mad.
Go there.
My take is this. I was saying this to someone at the show the other night. We were talking about we're trying to compare what like a circus performer does and a musician, and what are the similarities, and there's like the classic circus disciplines, your hand balancing, your trapeze, all that kind of stuff. But there's obviously like a bunch of new stuff. Like one of the girls in the show does this incredible hula hoop thing, and contortionists, and talking about like, obviously the more established something is, the more you're going to have orthodox methods of teaching and performing. So in the guitar sphere, my point was like, I guess the 2 most prominent styles of guitar where like technical orthodoxy is a must, a classical guitar. There's certain things you need to be able to do in order to perform the repertoire, because the repertoire is the important thing and you're interpreting it and communicating it. And the other one is gypsy jazz, which I know nothing about, but, you know, one big thing is how you hold a pick. And certain approaches to string crossing. And, you know, if you've ever seen a gypsy jazz play, they often have this very arched floating wrist. And it's something I've been playing around with a bunch for. And again, I'm not teaching people how to play gypsy jazz because I don't know anything about it, but it's like if you're having trouble alternate picking a line, you're trying to play a Paul Gilbert thing or a Steve Vai thing. One way to teach yourself how to be relaxed is to play with a floating wrist. I call it the flipper because it's like the Marty Friedman thing. So you practice sloppy, so you don't worry about the string noise, but you use the flipper, and then when you go back to your however you like to pick, you've kind of taught yourself how to be very relaxed when you're executing certain things. So there's that sort of orthodox thing. The fucking boost pedal thing, man, is like you have the broad spectrum of things that are metal, and there's no orthodox guitar technique. It's kind of awesome in that regard. You just fucking figure out how to, you know, you see guys with really efficient techniques. You see dudes where it's like, you know, they look like they're contorting their arm, like however you want to do it, as long as you get the notes out, as long as you're expressing yourself. But the orthodoxy is coming through the, like, it's got to be a 5150 with a tube screamer with the gain on 0 and the level on 10, you know, so there are these elements of, and it's a fine line between, like, is it just like you have to do this, or is it, you know, we talk about it, Troy, a lot, where it's like it's just kind of received wisdom. It's like, you know, so when we opened for Yngwie, I looked at his rig at the Brisbane show, 100-watt plexi, mid-range and treble all the way up, bass all the way down, master all the way up, presence at just below noon, you know. The bass was on 0. Of course it was. Like, you know, that's just kind of where you start with those amps, right? You know, whereas if you're used to playing a 5150, you might start with the bass all the way up and be like, no, plexis suck.
Yep.
Is it like this kind of, not ancient, but it's a formula from a bygone era that is
it's a recipe
still being applied to modern amps. So there's so many modern amps now that have enough gain, too much gain, arguably,
and enough filtering. Because to me, the reason you do it is because you're applying more gain to the front end, but you're also trying to filter out excess low end. So it's a great 100%. Trick. But then you have this thing where it's like, cool, that filters out low end and it boosts things and it pushes the mid range. It's great if you're playing a stock 2203, right? Because then you get
that's right.
more gain. But then someone goes out and is like, you know what we're going to do? We're going to take the stock 2203. We're going to put an extra gain stage in. We're going to have selectable filtering. We're going to have all this stuff. And then someone's like, you know what would be awesome on top of this? A boost, you know? So it's like, and again, it's like, you know, you go and order a burger and it's got sauce on it, but you're used to putting sauce on your burger, so you put more sauce. You're like, well, this is even more good, right?
Well, no, then you complain it's got too much sauce on it.
Well, this exactly. Is it. I was going to say. Yeah. And then you complain that the burger doesn't like more sauce.
Yeah.
It's not a good pedal platform.
It was served ready to eat. It didn't need anymore.
Yep.
Yeah. It's actually something I've been wrapping my head around a little bit as well, where it's like, oh, actually, all those things you do that you think you need to, why don't you just, like, and look, this is a good segue into the amps you've just modded for us, because Troy got his 1977 JMP back, and, you know, you did the Jakey Lee mod and the Jose thing on there. So I borrowed the amp, and people would have seen the video, and I was like, I can't wait to try these. First thing, you know, saturation on Jakey Lee on, amazing. I'll try it without the Jakey Lee. Oh, it's really, really good. Play guitar for 45 minutes. I wonder what it's like without the Jose mod on. Stock, bone stock, and it's a 2203, right?
It's been modded a little bit from stock, right?
With a few.
It's like the only difference from stock, and it's back to what you were just saying, Leon, is that it's got a tighter front end.
I see. So that's cool to know.
What the interesting thing, and this relates back to the boost, you know, the conversation about the boost pedal, right? So the 2203 especially, and obviously 2204 as well, and then into the SLO 100, which I would say is the beginning of the modded Marshall era, in terms of people actually moving them into being production amps rather than just Marshalls that had been modded. All of that stuff still had quite a large first coupling cap after the first gain stage, which means that a lot of bass gets let through.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of bass in the preamp, and then when you cascade that into another gain stage and then another, it gets bloated real quick. And we also know from our last conversation that in these kind of Marshalls, the tone stack's right at the end.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't, in those stock amps, and the SLO is the same, you can't reduce the bass through the preamp.
Yep.
Because by the time you get to the EQ where you can bring that bass pot down, it's too late.
Yep.
It's already got all fat and bloated, So those mods, back to Troy's 2203, it's got a much leaner coupling cap, smaller.
So very, very cool.
In a stock amp, it's 22 nanofarad. And in Troy's amp, it's 2.2 nanofarad. It's an order of magnitude lower.
Yeah, right. That's really interesting. Yeah. So
and
I would argue that the recipe for modern high gain, which is coming from those modern Marshalls and especially the SLO, is cut bass, pre-gain, boost bass, post-gain with either a bass control or a depth resonance, that kind of thing, which again is sort of, you can do on a Mark series if you know how it works. Well, but it does it in a sort of different way, right? So
I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, with the tone stack so early in the Mark series amps, a lot of people will say that it's bloody useless. Kind of isn't when you think of it that way, because it actually allows you to dial that bass out really early, which is what you need. The SLO circuit, so this old the Club Secret thing that I did with Shay.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yep.
So that amp came from the Club Secret release for 23, because our idea here is that we'll do one a year and it'll be a different circuit every time.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we've already started hatching our plans for Club Secret 24. I don't know when that'll happen, but it'll be 24 because we'll prototype it and settle on the circuit in 24.
It's at least 9 months away, everybody. We can start saving now.
Saving now. And we're trying not to surprise everybody this time. We'll actually give probably some warning about it. But that amp came from, it wasn't a copy of, because we kind of took it and then changed it a bit, but it came from the amp that we modded, or fixed, I should say, and then tweaked a little bit when I was with Shay in 2023, last year.
Mm-hmm.
And that amp belonged to a guy, Mark, who works for Shaw. And he'd been following my channel. He knew that I was going there, and he emailed me and he says, I've got this old JMP that I bought and it doesn't work. Can I send it to you? And we got that amp and we got it going, and we were like, wow, this thing sounds awesome. And then we kind of had a closer look and realized that it basically was an SLO. But
interesting.
With some changes, right? And it was a bit more Marshall-y than a straight SLO, because Mike, there's no doubt that the SLO, I can see it. It's a modded 2203 with an extra gain stage. And then obviously he changed a whole bunch of values through the plate and cathode resistors and interstage dividers and so on to make it a different circuit. But the architecture and so on, it's very Marshall-y. But this amp was a Marshall that had that extra gain stage put in, but it still had some of the old Marshall values in it. So it was that real kind of hybrid of the two.
Mm-hmm.
And it had that really lean first coupling cap that I was just talking about. It had the 2N2 rather than the 22. So man, it was super tight.
Yeah.
And,
so that's what I got. Yeah. Back to my thing I was saying, the non-Jakey Lee, non-sap thing on Troy's thing. I was like, this is just one of the best amps I've ever played in my life. Like it's the sound of a Marshall in my head,
Yeah.
Where you just get it into that place and you're like, well, this is kind of the only guitar sound you really need in your life. Just,
And this is why
play rock.
the tube screamer or, even I guess an EQ or whatever in front of those things, and in front of the stock amps was so important because you needed to drop the bass out.
Yeah.
As an aside, Shay did a lot of research because we took heaps of photos and so on of that amp. And he went down the rabbit hole one day and found pictures of that exact amp, right, on some site somewhere. And it was modded in 85, 86.
All right.
By Mike Soldano.
Right.
Whoa. So that's some proper guitar archaeology right there.
Yeah. The owner, Mark, had no idea. He just bought it off some young guy who didn't know what it was.
Wow.
So, yeah, you can tell.
So that's pre-production SLO, right?
Pre-SLO. I spoke to Dave about it, Dave Freeman, and Dave's like, yeah. This is how the SLO was born, like everyone who's in this high gain ended up doing high gain production amps. You start by modding stuff almost always, Yeah,
it's interesting as well because we have the benefit of YouTube now, right? Where all these things can kind of be documented. But I remember when I first started watching your channel, I always be like, man, I really like the way this guy just dials an amp in and the way you like to do things, I can hear reflected in the way you voice your own amps. So I think and it would obviously be the same with Mike and with Dave and, you can say that, oh, well, everyone's just doing a modded Marshall thing, but where it becomes interesting is like the Marshall is, it's so ubiquitous that it becomes this blank canvas for someone to kind of project their own tastes and, you get to voice it the way you like it. So if the cool thing to me is like if someone hears a video that you've done modding an amp or you're demoing something and they like the sound, they're probably going to be super into the ALTA or the Evil Joe because it's you're using your ears the whole time you're voicing this thing. It's not just like, it's not an abstract exercise in circuit design.
Yeah, that's an interesting. It's an interesting point. Like, and it kind of goes back to why did I even start the channel in the first place?
Yeah.
And if it's not obvious to anybody, it's because I wanted to build an audience that I could sell amps to.
Yeah, I mean, it's why
it's not
basically
because
why
I wanted to share all my secrets.
Yeah.
Although I don't mind doing that.
It's like for me, I'm just here to like normalize pitch detune and stereo delay, and so that people will be into the music that I make. So
yeah.
And it was funny.
I platform for that, right?
Yeah, I heard a desk mix of the show. Yeah, but
hey,
but here we are. It was. We were listening to a desk mix of this show that I'm doing here in Sydney at the moment, and the drummer was like, "Wow, I have to give it to you. Like the guitars sound huge. Like there's no keyboard player." She was like, "Oh, I only kind of realized that. Yeah, that's just it. It's just a 3-piece." In my head, right. I was like, micro pitch. It's doing the heavy lifting, playing in stereo.
It must be nice, Leon, playing in stereo. Jeez,
hey, Leon,
it's actually incredible, dude.
Are you So I know you use a stereo rig, right? And if you're in ears, then that's awesome as well. But how do you deal with? You must rock up to heaps of venues where the PA is mono.
Oh, heaps. Yeah. So the Ingve tour was a good example of that, where because we weren't allowed to breathe the same air as the guy, so we got about 3 seconds to sound check. What I did was I went with whatever the number of XLRs I got presented with by the techs. So the Melbourne show, I got handed a single XLR, so I just played in mono. Basically what I've got on the Fractal is they have this Perform Pages tab. Yep. So what I've got on there is, because you can deep in the menus, there's like, you can set the output mode to sum or to stereo. But you can map those to the little Perform page. So I have the bypass state for my stereo pitch detune, and I have the sum left and right thing. So I just use the same patch, and am I using a single thing? Well, I go to the Perform tab, I twist 2 knobs, and then I'm mono ready. And for the ragdoll thing, it's a meat and potatoes thing. It's a boosted. I've actually been using the 5150 Stealth model a bunch, but that or it's like either that boosted or they have a like they've got a they added it not too long ago. It's just a bone stock Canadian 2203 that Cliff bought. Basically, a bunch of us on the forum complained that there was no 100 watt JCM 800, right? And then he's on the forum. It's like, is this a good one to buy? And someone was selling like a mint, the Canadian one with the different switches and
with the toggle switches. Yeah.
And I mean, it sounds so similar to the 2204 that was in there, but there's enough.
It is a good model. I've tried that one. It's a good. Yeah. It's definitely a good one.
But you know what I tried to do with it? I had Troy's amp as a reference. So I was like playing it, and I was like, it's like his amp's like a little bit beefier and it's a little bit tighter. So it's like, because you've got all the virtual parameters, I like increase the negative feedback and the depth a little bit, and like put a little bit of a low cut in there, and it's tighter. And I tried to do virtual Jason to it.
Yeah, because Troy's amp's got a depth. We didn't put a depth on that.
Not a pot. No, I think it's fixed.
It's a fixed depth, but it's
you did mention that.
Yeah, it's like having your depth pot up at like 11 a.m. or noon, maybe something like that. So
yeah, that's exactly where I've got it on the model.
Hey, can I ask you a question out of nowhere? Hypothetically, question. If we're talking about like taking bass out of a preamp and then maybe adding it later on in a circuit. Could you put a knob? I'm just interested to see if this is possible. Can you put a knob on the front that is just that? As you turn the knob, like the bass goes out, but the depth goes up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a stupid idea, actually.
Yeah, I've thought
you do like you could use a dual gang pot.
Yeah.
So you know what a dual.
Yeah, I know.
You need to be careful. So the thing about this is that when you think about, it's one thing to design a circuit. You can draw a schematic out, or maybe draw a rough layout or whatever, and get it down on paper. But physical layout, is really, really important, because
like on the PCB sort of thing, you mean?
You run into oscillation and all kinds of noise and rubbish.
Yep.
And if you're mixing, such a pot in a dual gang, let's just hypothetically think about that. A dual gang pot, and I can do this, I can move it, and it's doing two things simultaneously. Well, you're kind of mixing the output section with the preamp section there, and putting them really close together in terms of physical proximity, which means you just open yourselves up to a feedback loop.
Yeah.
And it'll happen for sure. It'll be a disaster.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe his way of do it, you could do it remotely somehow, but
I'm not in the market to be making an amp, so I just thought, that sort of seems like a good idea, because you get.
I've done that.
Balance.
I've done that on the Axe, where because you can have external modifiers, and actually attaching it to an expression pedal and being like, okay, as you turn bass down or low cut, preamp, low cut, and post amp boost. I think I did it with like a Mark series, so it's like as you turn the bass down, the 240 slider goes up. It's pretty interesting, cool. But the thing that's really hard to voice is distortion is non-linear. So like you literally have chaotic stuff to deal with, where it's like, as I sweep through that in real time, it's actually, if you started with those values and then played, it's fine, but it's like the changing and the interaction that happens is what can cause some really funky, you're like, as I sweep through it, it sounds really, really bad. So yeah, I'm sure it's, as you said, it's possible. My other dumb idea is, you basically make a Mark series amp, right? Without the graphic EQ. But yeah, and I'm sure this is what companies have done, and I'm sure they've called it like Contour or something like that, where it just goes from like flat to the classic scoop thing. You just have that in there. But then everybody's got a different recipe with their Mark series, where it's like, no, I boost 240 or I cut it.
Yeah.
Look, I've actually heard an amp. It was a one-off, but I heard it and got to play through it. It was described to me as a Mark series front end, but without the with the EQ set. So like
Yep.
So like the very, the early EQ after the first gain stage or whatever, imagine that's preset. And then it was pushing into a more kind of traditional cathode follower driven tone stack.
Interesting.
And I tell you, it sounded awesome. That amp sounded like wow. And it was kind of it had a bit of a uniqueness about it because it was a recipe that is kind of familiar but different,
Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Well, we've talked a little bit about what you did to Troy's amp. I wanted to talk about what you did to not just my amp, but, the very spooky coincidence of the, the two Marshall 2959s that you've modded recently. And look, spooky coincidence that you got one and there was one for sale and I heard what you did and was like, well, I'd be an idiot not to buy this amp.
Can I tell my perspective of this story?
Please tell your perspective.
I get home from a gig at midnight. Oh, Jason's got a new video and I'm still awake. How about I see what this is? And so I watched that video. Literally, I looked at it, I'm like, I feel like I've seen one of these, like locally on Facebook. That can't be right because there's apparently only 150 of them or whatever. There's no way that's possible. The next day it comes up on Marketplace. I message Jason immediately. And then the next thing I know, Leon's bought it. It's like, all right. The unholy trinity strikes again.
I believe you also messaged me and said, hey, did you see Jason's video? Look, there's one for sale. And then I messaged Jason and said, should I buy this? And he was like, yeah, bro, that's a pretty good price. And I was like, will you mod it? And he was like, yeah, of course. So, and it was, for me, really interesting because I was like, okay, I messaged the guy and I was like, he was like, hey, man, I've got kids. I'm out at the moment. And I was like, he's like, we can chat later in the week. And I was like, I have cash. I can be there this afternoon. And then,
the old
didn't
Bill
hear anything
Todd.
for about, yeah, exactly. My dad trained me well. And basically 30 minutes later, I got this message and he was like, yeah, okay, like when can you be here? So it's about an hour away, but I'm about an hour away from everywhere. So, drove out there. And he like set the amp up in his living room. And I was like, look, I just want to test that it will make a sound. He was like, no, man, like go for it, play through it. The only guitar he had at the time was a Telly. So basically plexi, crack the volume. So it's, that bright cap is just like, here I am, baby, Telecaster. Had a blast. It was like the loudest thing I'd heard in a long time. And I was like, yep, this is good, man. I'll take it. And then he had young kids who, they just love... he was like, oh, they're going through this thing where they love the Beatles. So I ended up playing Day Tripper for like 5 minutes and they were having a dance. It was really, really nice. It was sort of like he gigged this amp for years and it originally come from Lounge Guitars here in Perth, which I don't think is a shop anymore, but it's still a backline company. But yeah, so it's, and then the amp went in the same box that Troy sent his amp to you and Jason, and then the box barely made it. Yeah. Tell the story. So who sent you the box?
So it's such not an exciting story, but the Cornford that's sitting behind me there. So Scott, who will listen to this, sent his Cornford over.
I need to catch up with him while I'm here in Sydney. By the way.
Because he's coming over in a few weeks. We're going to go to Kalgoorlie and play some gigs, but he sent the Cornford over in a pack and send box. Spent a lot of money to get the amp here.
Nice box.
And then I used that same box to send my Marshall over to Jason. Jason sent the amp back in the same box to me. Leon needs to send his amp over. I gave him the box, and then it's gone over. But unfortunately, poor little out for that box because it did not make another trip across the Nullarbor.
It didn't. I didn't want to look. If I'd applied a whole roll of tape to it, then it might have. It might have made it back, but it was in poor shape by the time I got here.
Yeah, it was in good shape when it left, so we'll blame whoever picked it up. But it's a shame.
It's the biggest box I've ever received an amp in.
Oh, really?
That's for sure. Oh, yeah.
Oh, well, so that's
massive. That thing.
That was pack and send packing it for shipping, and I was really scared when I put mine in there because I was like, oh shit, I don't want this thing to...
Bro, Pack and Send actually do a pretty good job, man. While I was in New Zealand, I bought a guitar on Gumtree, and the guy sent it via Pack and Send, and it was the way that he just dropped it off to them and said, "Hey, pack this in." It was immaculate the way they'd done everything. It was beautiful.
Well, it was just nice to have a box that was ready to go in case of emergency, with all of the pellets and stuff in there as well. So, but as Leon said,
it is hard. Like finding, if you're throwing out, like people that bought an amp, maybe, if they bought it new, it'll come in a decent shipping box, but more often than not, they throw it away.
Yep.
And so if you need to ship an amplifier, it's actually pretty hard to find a suitable box.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I got a whole lot custom cut and done.
Right.
For it, which was perfect, right? But there's no, and I did have a look, I did have a hunt around. It was really actually hard, almost impossible to find one just, off the rack, if you like, from the box suppliers.
Yeah.
So
you get Krusty down at the box factory to sort us out.
You got to get them custom made, Anyway.
So anyway, sorry, that's the most boring part of the whole story.
That's the story of the box. That it made it.
The box.
Part one.
Yeah.
But anyway, so
you
back to the
tell us the difference, because you had a bone stock 2959 come in, and then you had mine, which was not bone stock. Very much not bone stock.
Yeah. So it is a the more you do this, I've found the more reluctant I am to mod vintage gear.
Yep.
It's a funny thing. Like, I don't know. There's nothing rational about it other than you feel like you're destroying history.
Mm-hmm.
So the guy with the first 2959, I mean, he got referred to me through a friend of his who I'd worked on. Like, he had some late 60s Marshalls that I worked on a little while ago. And so this guy actually ended up bringing into me, I think he had 3 or 4 different amps for me to kind of work on. And they all of them had problems. But the 2959 he brought in was actually in pretty good working order, is my memory of this thing. And it was legit stock. And so,
wow,
I had quite a long conversation with him about, are you really sure that you want to do this? And I said, I'm not going to drill and I'm not going to do any of that kind of crap, right? Anything we do to it will ultimately be reversible. Because you're just rewiring it basically.
Yeah.
Right?
Because there also is the thing where, in opening up that amp, you get to document it in its stock state, right? And if it's a collector's piece, you have to have that conversation about, like, hey man, you could sell this and just buy a 1959 hand wired or something, Or
it's interesting. Everyone's got a different, slant on it. And he was like, no. I've had this amp for a long time. It's mine. I'm keeping it.
Yeah,
it didn't strike me as, I can spot the flippers, using that term again. I know most of who they are because they're always on the bloody Facebook selling something, I can tell. So I was like, I always think about, not that it doesn't impact how I approach something, but I do like to know whether the person's in for the long haul or whether they're going to play for something for 2 weeks and then put it up for sale.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just the thing that I just like to know about it. So anyway, I could tell that he was like, no, this is my amp, and I'm gonna keep this thing, but I want to be able to play it. He said it's unplayable at the moment. Can't do anything with it. It's too loud. Because even though it has the reverb and all that in it, it's still a non-master volume amp.
Yeah.
And he's like, I just don't turn it on because it's unpleasant.
And it is interesting for that era Marshall, right? Because it has got a plate-driven tone stack stock.
Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, because didn't they do? I saw something. The Park amps.
Mm-hmm.
I think they sort of like played around with a few things with plate-driven tone. Like, there's some interesting Marshalls that have the Park badge on them because of that whole distribution deal. But they've got some interesting specs that like probably aren't super well documented.
Yeah. Well, the 2959, I actually hunted around for a schematic on the internet, and I couldn't find one.
Wow.
Which is unusual, right? Because those Marshalls are well documented. In fact, most of the stuff you find are the actual schematics from the factory. Most of them have been, photocopied 10 times or whatever, and they're pretty hard to read, but they are the real ones. And so the 2959 was a mystery. But the guy that owned that stock 2959, and I did write the name of the book down, but I can't bloody remember what it was. He's got a Marshall book, and it's a history of something or other, Marshall history book, and it's got schematics in it.
All right.
And he had the 2959, which is in the video. I think I showed the schematic. That was him taking a photo of the book and sending it to me. Yeah. So it was, and that was when I kind of saw. I mean, I obviously could have traced it out, but having that, so it's a huge head start. So as soon as I saw it, I was like, "Oh my god, this is not a super lead. It's super lead-esque. It's similar, but it's not the same. And it's not just, as you said, right? It's plate-fed tone stack. It's not just the reverb. That's the difference in it. The schematic was pretty accurate. It was the only difference was that when I actually got to the amp and had a look inside, I realized that it must have been something that they did once they actually built the amp and put it into production. The reverb driver preamp tube. So one of the preamp tubes was used to drive the reverb tank. So to push your signal into it.
Yeah.
And then to amplify the spring sound afterwards. And those reverb tanks are always, it's like a parallel effects loop.
Right.
So your core signal goes through, if you like, and then, there's a send. Mm-hmm. Your dry signal is sent out to the reverb tank and then mixed back in again.
Right.
Yep.
So they were doing, reverb, parallel loops were done way, way, way back.
Oh, yeah.
They were just inside the amp, that's all.
Yeah.
But the way it was just a little thing that I had to kind of like get my head around, because when in the physical form, it was a different tube.
Right.
And the schematic had notated. It was a minor thing, but and I think I probably said this last time, right? The challenge with the mod stuff is, and this is I actually quite enjoy the challenge. Actually, you got to figure out how to implement the thing that you want in the physical form of what you presented. Mm-hmm. So you can implement the same circuit into different amps and make them kind of sound almost identical, but your starting point is going to be completely different every time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like that Cameron modded thing that you cleaned up that was like semi-degooped and there were all the extra bits and, that's one way to do it, but it's not very elegant.
Right. That's crazy. So have you got a Hot Rod 50, Leon?
I do, yeah.
I modded one yesterday.
Oh, really? Very interesting.
Guy from California sent it over to me.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And look, it's not that, I mean, people think sending stuff from the States to here is like impossibly expensive. It's not. And not that much more than sending something from Perth to Melbourne.
I was going to say Perth to Melbourne, yeah. It's kind of crazy.
More, but not.
More pays, but probably one direct hit. It's still the same, right? So
it's almost like, what I found because I've become an expert in worldwide logistics in the last year, is that getting it into the system and out of the system it's kind of like there's almost like an entry fee for that.
Yeah, right.
And then where it goes doesn't seem to matter so much. I mean, there is obviously some variability with the price depending on where it's going, but it's not the major determinant. It's the weight and dimensions, and that dictates the fee to get it, into their system. Once it's in their system, it just moves around and doesn't kind of matter too much where it's going.
Right, that's wild.
But yeah, that Hot Rod 50, I will do a video on that just to kind of demonstrate what it sounds like. It's not one I'm minded to kind of open source. But man, it sounds really good.
Oh, dude, I cannot wait to hear it.
You might want to reuse that box that I sent you.
I reckon about 30 minutes into this, 10 minutes in when you talk about modding the dual rectifier, I was like, oh, maybe you could modify the hot rod just because.
Oh, yeah.
I hate where the effects loop is. It's pre-tone stack.
Yeah, it is.
It's unusable.
Was that, did someone already have a shot at that?
See, I have heard that Perry got into it, but I think it may have just been to change the level coming out of the loop.
Oh, okay.
But I also don't know. And then Graham has done his stuff with it.
Oh, yeah.
He actually complimented. So for a long time, I was taking my amps to an older guy here in Perth who, man, he must be close to 90 now, and he's still going. But ex-telecom engineer, builds tube radios, builds his own amps, awesome. And, would always just charge us peanuts to get the amps fixed.
Nothing. For context.
Insane.
He sorted out, we keep his name maybe off the thing, but
yeah.
He fixed my Splawn, which was just fucking up, and he retuned my, 5152 in total for $200, including the tubes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was nothing. It was and there was a bit of work on that Splawn too, a lot of, sorting them out. So,
yeah, he sorted out my dual recto as well when it was just not working. And he was like, oh, the power supply for V1 is also the power supply for the relays. So that's why it's there. So I built my own. He built a separate power supply, and he's a legend. He's so good. But he was like, I have to say, man, this Soldano is, he said the layout on it and where everything's placed, he's like, it's the best amp I've ever looked at from that perspective, where it's so, for the amount of gain you have, the amount of noise is really great. And he's got some old high watts and things like that as well, which he's rebuilt, and that kind of military spec thing. And he's like, yeah, it's a cool, as good, if not better.
Amp.
Yeah,
it's a cool amp, and the construction, because I was literally working on this amp yesterday and then this morning. Just like the SLO 100s, it's impeccable construction. Yeah. Everything's just done beautifully. The circuit board's really great. It's for that era, it's still a double-sided board, and it's really nice thick fiberglass. It's not a flimsy. I reckon one of the reasons why in the amp world PCBs still have this, there's a little bit of
stigma.
People shit on them, it probably comes from the printed circuit boards that Marshall introduced in the early 70s, right, when they went from turret to their first the first PCB boards that were used in, it's probably about 73, around about that time, until about 75-ish, where they then moved to kind of a second generation printed circuit board, which is pretty much the same that they still use to today.
Wow.
In the reissue amps. It's not a great printed circuit board, but the ones that were kind of 73 to 75, they're literally like a wafer biscuit. You crack them, they're awful. And you apply a soldering iron to them, and the copper tracks just lift off. They're awful. But it's not, this we're talking about 50 years ago.
Yeah. Yep.
Things have moved on. Printed circuit boards aren't like that now. People need to get over this bloody hand-wired thing.
Yeah. Well, didn't you say, I think on the first podcast we did, it's no, you have point-to-point and you have PCB. There's a shitload of hand wiring in both.
It's hand-wired.
Yeah. It's all hand-wired.
It's like my other thing. I don't know always, but I've literally given up trying on this crusade, and my crusade is 800. People say it's a JCM 800. I'm like, which one?
Exactly.
It's a series of amps, right?
This is a thing I only recently realized, probably because of you, where it's the circuit number is important.
Yeah, it's a series. It's there's eight different JCM 800s.
They did a 1959 for input. Did they do a 1987 circuit?
Yes, I've got one.
Wow, that's awesome. Yeah. Obviously 2203, 2204, 2210, 2205. So that's
Club and Country amps, I think.
Yeah. And was the artist?
Mm-hmm. So there's a
JCM
whole
800.
That's earlier, isn't
and
it? I mean,
Maybe.
most people understand the 2205, the first 2-channel JCM 800. And if anyone's ever played one of those amps up against a 2203, it sounds massively different because it's a completely different circuit.
Yeah.
that's what you've got,
Completely.
Haley. Or you got 2210.
2210.
Right.
And, I did ask Jason, I was like, look, could I send this to you and you could just 2203ify it? And he was like, nah. So
It's more
there's that.
like, the only good thing I think, it's a good thing, but I can see that when they started there, that was a stepping stone that became the Jubilee
Yep.
eventually. Mm-hmm. And that's a cool amp.
Yeah.
Well,
could you mod it to Jube specs?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah.
we'll leave that question for a private consult.
I did. Back in my era when I would just take anything.
Yeah.
Just because I wanted to just try and learn stuff, I did actually take a 2205 in and modded it. I added basically what I did was I took a gain stage from the clean channel and added it to the dirty channel.
Yeah, right. Because mine has terrible channel bleed as well. It's like
it's awful.
It's absolutely rubbish.
Two things.
Yeah.
Firstly, my Marshall, I'm a little scared because I don't know what to call it. I just say it's my Marshall. But just in terms of like not embarrassing myself, what shall I call that? Because I know it's like 1959, but then it was like master volume, right? So then it's kind of more 2203-ish, but then it says J and P on it. So like, what would I actually call that thing?
I mean, you could call it an optimized 2203.
Optimized 2203? I'll just call it a 2. Okay.
The Optimus Prime.
I mean, it's a 2203 now, and we like.
Now with the 2203, there's a difference from that in the 1959 with where the gain stages.
Yeah.
Obviously, and where the filtering is, right? It's not just like put a master volume on it and it's a 2203.
Right. I mean, there was a brief moment where Marshall added a master volume, like a pre-phase inverter master volume, which is what a 2203 has. And honestly, almost all high gain amps have that same master volume now. It's exactly the same. So it's just before the phase inverter, after the EQ, and just before the phase inverter. But Marshall did have, for a brief moment in time, they had the Plexi style front end, which is parallel gain stages. So if you think of your 4-hole Marshall, you have a normal channel and a treble channel, or sometimes like volume 1, volume 2. Those gain stages are actually in parallel, and then they mix together.
Yep.
After the volume pots. So each...
Yeah, right.
Obviously, if you've got the channels jumpered, you can blend them. Straight after those volumes, the signal comes together into one and then makes its way through the rest of the amp. So they did have a master volume that they added because people were obviously complaining and going like, we need to better control the volumes of these things. But when you do that, you lose a lot of gain because all of a sudden... the reason the Plexi overdrives so much is because you're distorting the phase inverter. As soon as you put a master volume before the phase inverter, you're attenuating that signal and the phase inverter is no longer overdriving, and it just sounds like a crunchy amp.
Yeah.
So how do you get that overdrive back in the front?
Exactly. So with the 2203, they took rather on V1, the first preamp tube, rather than having each tube has 2 gain stages. All right, so inside a 12AX7 are 2 triodes. And if you look at schematics and stuff, you'll see that they're always labeled V1A and V1B. And as I just said, in the 1959 or 1987 Plexi circuit, those 2 are in parallel. So they're not pushing each other, they're just working independently, and then they mix together afterwards. So 2203, they cascaded one into the other. So the output of V1A then goes to your preamp gain. On the front of the amp, it says preamp gain or whatever the hell I call it. And the output of that, so with the pot you can adjust how much, then gets sent straight in to V1B. and then you get the cascaded gain stage.
Yep.
And it's just like all you're doing there is using the output of one to push the second one into clipping, just like you would put a boost pedal in front. You can smash the first stage of your amp into clipping earlier. Exactly the same thing.
Yeah. So with the 2959 you modified for me, what's cool about that is I feel like I got all the candy and I got the extra gain stage on there. Because if you plug into the low input, you just get an internally jumpered 1959 circuit, but it has the pre-phase inverter master. So people can go and watch the video where I'm turning the master up and down. Yeah, once it goes below about noon, then it's it's kind of like mildly crunchy and not in a super satisfying way. So you plug into the top input, the tube that was driving the spring reverb, which was non-existent when I bought the amp anyway. It's just a tube hanging out there waiting to do some stuff. You've utilized that for an additional gain stage that can then hit the parallel gain stage. Yeah, it's knowing when you modded and explained it to me, it was sort of like, okay, cool. You've actually got, the classic sort of front end boost thing, and then you've got the parallel volume 1, volume 2 thing, and then you've got how much you want to hit the phase inverter. It's really, there's a lot of different textures in that amp.
The cool thing about a tube gain stage, and this is like, you think about this in terms of pedals versus a tube gain stage. So the amount of amplification, or like, if you think about your guitar, it's in electrical form. It becomes a waveform, and the amplitude, or the volume, if you like, if you want to think of it that way, it's a voltage. You can measure it with a multimeter, or you can put it on an oscilloscope, and you can see the waveform, and you can see how big is it. Let's measure the voltage, either RMS or peak to peak or whatever. When you push that through a triode on a tube gain stage, the voltage, the amplification factor, or the voltage swing that you can get out of that is determined by the voltages that the tube is actually operating at.
Right.
Like often called the B+.
Yes, right. Yep.
So in a tube amp, those voltages are high. 200 volts DC, 250 volts DC, 300.
And this is why a lot of preamp pedals that incorporate preamp tubes, they'll often have the selling point of like, it's a high voltage design, because they want what you're explaining here.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's just so dynamic. And it's just, that kind of response that we love, and you can, you turn the guitar volume down and they clean up and all that stuff is because they're just super dynamic. So they have heaps of headroom, which I think you experience with that, how they clean up so beautifully when you roll the volume down. But when you push them into clipping, they break up beautifully as well. So when you cascade tube gain stages, you can get into overdrive real quick. And 2 gain stages, you'll get crunchy. 3 gain stages, you're cooking with gas. All right. 3 gain stages, you can make sound like, 80s rock, happy days. 4 gain stages, you're modern high gain.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You don't need a bloody boost pedal either.
Yeah. Oh man, it's like,
if anyone puts a boost pedal in front of 4 gain stages, they need help.
Yeah. We all need help. We all need so much help. What I loved as well when you did the demo and the chopstickification of my amp and went through it, I love the fact that video exists because I can just reference it. And anytime I want to learn something about it, it's like, oh, cool. That's again, like you were saying with Joe, where it's like, that having that extra little bit of knowledge when you're chasing a sound can be really important. Yeah. But the fact you just played Bark at the Moon and it was like... That's the sound. And like what was really interesting, and it goes back to what I was saying about like the way you play and the way you dial in sounds. That's like the first thing I chased on there. I was like, man, how do I get that sound that Jason had? And it's like a large part of it, dude, is just like how you play. It's like, oh no, he's got that which I think is so cool. You know, and like Troy, we were saying this, where it's like, you know, obviously someone like Dave Friedman doesn't put out YouTube videos where he's playing guitar because he's got super high profile clients who can do it. But like, you know, that dude can play guitar based on the way his amps sound. Like you can't, you just can't know that. Like you need that package in there where it's like, you have to know how to play a bit. You have to know how to like dial in a sound to be able to tone chase in that way. It's not just like an abstract skill. So
and he can, and I've heard him. I've sat in the room and watched him play, and you know, I mean, you guys know this. I don't even need to explain it. Someone picks up a guitar, and from the very first note, you can tell.
Yep.
He was like that straight from the very first note. And I was like, hey.
Yeah. He looks like the type of guy that would be a really great. He's got that like good right hand control. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what I noticed straight away.
Yep.
It's like total kind of control of like he was just like, because he played the first time I heard him play guitar was in his workshop, and we'd literally just lifted an ALTA 100 out of the cardboard box. This was last year when I went to see him, and because I said to him, man, like I had that ALTA 100 that had I think it was the one that Kyle Bull had demoed.
Yep.
And then from Kyle, I gave him a shipping label and we sent it straight to Dave, something like that. And because I said to Dave, I said, man, like, if you want, I'll ship an amp to your premises. And so when I kind of get there, we can fuck around with it, you know?
Yeah.
And he's like, hell yeah, that sounds like fun. So it had just been sitting in the box for 3-4 days before I got there. And so I got it out and I put it on his workbench. And without hesitation, he just got the drill out and opened it up, took the chassis out of the head cab, flipped it upside down on his bench, and just looked straight into it. And I'm just standing there watching this
final boss,
watching Dave Friedman of all people like pull apart my amp. And he looked inside and he goes, "Oh, it's pretty." I'll never forget that. Oh, it's pretty. And then he just plugged it in. And the cab, so his room there, his workbench is kind of at one end of the room. It's a nice sized room, actually. At the other end, he's got his favorite 4x12s. And that one, he's got this old 4x12 that's had all the Tolex ripped off it.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like the Ed Van Halen thing. Mm-hmm. I don't know whether he got it like that or whether he ripped the Tolex off himself. I can't remember. He did tell me the story. I can't recall it.
I think I've heard that before. It's online somewhere, but yeah, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Something about, I think the cabinet might have been owned by Billy Gibbons at one point.
Oh, okay.
Could be wrong about that. But
and it's got those, is that the one with the 90s greenbacks in it? Early 90s greenbacks?
Yeah, I think so. It's the one, he took that cabin, you know, so he's got a 2 notes Dyne IR pack.
Yep.
That cab is one of the ones that
that's cool.
He took in. So he plugged into that cab and just cranked it pretty loud, not ear bleeding volume, but loud enough that the amp was working a bit. And he just pulled a guitar off one of his Friedman guitars, I think, off the rack. And from the very first chord, I was like, yeah, he can play.
Yeah.
Just really tight rhythm.
Yep.
Like he was just chugging on A chords and stuff like that. But it was like and Leon, as you said, I don't understand, and I know there are some people that do this, but I don't understand how someone be an amp designer and not play guitar.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because there are people that are like that.
Well, wasn't Jose like that?
I don't know.
I'm pretty sure Jose didn't play guitar.
Is that?
Didn't Jose? I'm pretty sure Jose didn't play guitar.
That's what Dave says. Yeah. Dave says he had a guitar.
Leo Fender as well, right? Yeah. So there's that, a problem solver, but he had great people around him who could play, right? They were like, yeah, it needs this, and I guess his skill was as an interpreter for those desires.
Yeah, it's remarkable that like that guy, the guy that did the 5150 for Fender.
Oh yeah.
Post the PV thing, which is a bit of a redesign.
Mm-hmm.
Howard Kaplan, he's been on Tone Talk. That's how I know about him. And he said on the live stream, he said, I don't play guitar. at all,
Wow.
which is I find amazing.
Yeah, that's absolutely wild, man.
Could you imagine turning up with a prototype of an amp that you've designed and built for Eddie Van Halen,
but never played,
and you've never played through it? It's like, and you hand it to him. It's like, here you go, man. Check it out.
Yeah,
It's insane to me.
That is maniacal. I know we've been going for a while, but I do want to ask you about the connection with Kyle Rhodes and the way that's feeding into having your amps more widely available in the States.
Yeah, that's cool. Thanks, Leon. So Kyle, on the first visit to the US, so that was May last year, that was, other than kind of meeting, Joe and Dave and obviously spending time with my buddy Shay, and I want to give a shout out to Shay, who I will say without his help and friendship, the Headfirst in the US wouldn't exist.
Yeah, I really want to get Shay on the show because all the Monomyth stuff sounds incredible.
That would be killer. It'd be awesome show. I mean, it'd be great. And that partnership and friendship that has developed with him, and it's just been so helpful for both of us, I think. And it's just worked beautifully. It's funny how these things kind of slot into place.
Yeah.
And having boots on the ground in the US is so important. So when Shay and I, once I got to Indiana on that first trip, Shay and I got in the car and drove to see Kyle at KSR, and he's about 2 hours. He's just out of Cincinnati in Ohio. And so if anyone doesn't know, Kyle Rhodes, KSR. So when Kyle launched his own amp company 14 years ago, or give or take, it was Rhodes Amplification.
That's right.
And I believe he got a cease and desist letter from Fender.
Fender Rhodes, yep.
Not from Dusty Rhodes or Cody Rhodes, the wrestlers.
Yeah.
Okay, understand.
It's like, it's my fucking surname, dude.
Yeah.
like hello. But, law being the law.
Yeah.
It's a trademark name. He wasn't allowed to use it, which is that gave birth to KSR. Now, Kyle very cleverly has set his factory up, and he's got an incredible factory, 18,000 square feet. It's massive.
Whoa.
Multiple levels. And he owns it, right? He owns the building. Like he's gone all in, right? And it's just full of all the machinery you could possibly imagine. He's got CNC routers. He's got a whole woodwork floor, a Tolexine room. He's got sheet metal fabrication, bending, welding, pick and place machines for PCBs.
Oh, that's awesome.
To do surface mount stuff.
Yep.
We were talking to the Pirate MIDI guys last week, and they've got the pick and place stuff and a bunch of other things, which is super interesting.
Yeah, and laser engravers, you name it, it's there. He can fabricate everything, other than he's not winding transformers.
Right.
Wow. Which, so you've still got Mercury and Haber and Pacific Trans and so on. You've still got a bunch of companies in the US that are doing that. Mm-hmm. And he uses Haber in all his KSR stuff. So we went out to see Kyle and just got on fantastically with him. He's just another guitar player.
Yep.
Right? Who just happens to make amps. And interesting, everyone comes from a different kind of, they're kind of their DNA around the amps that they love, and they modded, because he's just like everyone else got into this by starting to tinker with and mod amps, and then obviously that grew into his own designs. Dual rectifier.
Right.
First amp he ever worked on and modded was a dual rectifier. And, he's kind of, I've noticed this, it's maybe slightly a generational thing because I'm nearly 54, and I was a teenager and before the dual rectifier was around, right? It was like Marshalls and then SLO, late 80s, early 90s, the SLO, But all the stuff that I'd already been burned into my brain was before the SLO came out. Everyone was playing Marshalls, or Marshalls that had been modded or boosted. So that's the thing that's in my brain,
That's
And
the
then I found that
foundational tone.
foundational tone. And I always say, like, what makes the guitar sound good to somebody, I think more often than not, it's this emotional response that they get because it brings up memories that are embedded in their brain based on the music that they listen to in those formative years.
Dude.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, dude.
So that's why I ask people, I say to them when just on the modding thing, who are your favorite players? What's your favorite guitar tone? Name an album or a song or whatever, right? Give me an idea of where you're kind of coming from. And then, it's really helpful in terms of being able to kind of tune something to that I will think that they will like. So we went to KSR and spent the day up there, and the idea was to basically see where Kyle was at, get to meet him, with a view of moving, having Kyle as part of our supply chain. And when I say ours, I'm talking about Shay and I, because we, in terms of kind of building our brands and finding our way along this journey that we're having to navigate. You basically largely navigate yourself.
Yeah.
Having that guy, like, I think Shay finds the same thing in reverse, right? We can brainstorm stuff, work out challenges together, figure out how we're going to get around some problem or whatever. It's been super helpful. It would be much more difficult without that sounding board and that help.
Mm-hmm.
So it probably took 6 months, right? Well, I kind of continued on just doing what I was doing. And then towards the end of 23, we finally kind of reached out to Kyle and said, right, let's get something going. It's time. It's time to kind of move things into the factory and see what happens. So we had to go through a bit of a, it was quite a lengthy process in terms of kind of the whole prototyping and getting established in there, because we had to go through a design phase with him and the team. Brand new chassis, different dimensions, brand new head shells that everything has to be turnkey and fit. And the advantage of going with Kyle, of course, is that because he can do everything, we could finally kind of consolidate everything into one place, because we were getting chassis from somewhere, head shells from somewhere else. In fact, Shay was using a different supplier than I was for head shells. It was a friggin' nightmare, and then you bring all these things together and you hope the hell that all the work that you've done to work at all the dimensions and everything, it's all going to work, and largely it does, but you end up with little mistakes that you need to correct.
Oh, dude.
Going with Kyle and his team, and Kyle is a incredible engineer in his own right. So he took everything that I sent him and brought it into his own CAD environment,
right,
and would fine tune, all of the sheet metal dimensions down to fractions of an inch, and and set up the CNC router for the head shell and everything, all matching perfectly. So as soon as we started getting, prototypes out from his shop, everything was just fucking, it's all perfect.
Yeah.
So he's now, they're all kitted up. So one of the things that people might not realize, and I won't name the brands because it's not my place to do that, but Kyle has a massive OEM shop.
Oh, okay.
He's building KSR product in there, everything from pedals to speaker cabinets.
Mm-hmm.
But he's also building for some really well-known brands that people don't know. It's outsourced manufacturing, it's the way to do it. I know this was mentioned, the guys you had on last week, the Pirate MIDI guys. It was, I think that was where I'm at in that podcast. I was listening to it this morning, was just kind of navigating that, like, do you do it yourself or do you outsource it,
Yep.
Yeah. And once if you do choose to do it yourself, well, you're probably, in the small percentile where you've done that. And then the flip side is it's like, well, okay, there's a given amount of production capacity you need to devote to your own thing, but there's other people who need stuff outsourced. So it's going to be in your best interest to then be doing OEM stuff in parallel with what you're doing. So it kind of makes sense that, like, I guess it's scale that's important there, where it's like,
this is it.
It's not, and it's non-linear. It's very stepped. It's like, well, okay, if we're going to scale up to the point where we can do everything like you said Kyle's doing, like for his amps, well, that means there's now all this spare capacity to, as you said, do the OEM thing. And yeah, I find that super interesting. It's,
it is like, it's been the thing. Yeah, the thing that's been really great with Kyle and the team is that they are flexible in terms of the part of the part of the manufacturing process that they will deliver.
Yeah,
and it can go from not much to everything.
Yeah.
And I absolutely have gone into this partnership with Kyle with an open mind about moving where that line is.
Yeah.
And at the moment, the amplifiers are built by me.
Right.
Yep.
So Kyle and the team are supplying custom parts for us. But they're not building full amplifiers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right. It's still done here by hand, like hand wired.
Yeah.
Hand wired by Jason.
Hand wired by Jason Tom.
And family.
Yeah.
Because we've got it's not just me in the workshop at any point in time. I have some helpers.
Awesome.
So it's cool. Like this Headfirst has evolved into a really cool family business too, by the way. So that's been really nice. Have some company and everyone's kind of in it.
That's cool.
So they're all built here, but when I've kind of visualized where this thing goes, I see, if I can hopefully continue to build the brand and the demand, that it gets to the point where maybe for certain models or, more established things and so on, that almost all of the amp build could be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then you're moving into this is in the future, right? But you've got to have a plan. You're moving more into what the more established companies are doing, like a Soldano or a Friedman, like a Victory. The list goes on and on and on. Those products are built in factories, but by expert manufacturing people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the thing is, it's like an Axe Effects, right? Like people will pull them apart and be like, oh, this part costs 30 cents on Mouser. And, it's like you're missing the whole point that the thing that makes it sound great is the code, right? It's, it's the
R&D
custom DSP and all the R&D that's gone into it and the user feedback. And again, with an amplifier, right? It's like, you're doing the designs. And when you are hand wiring them, you're building them to you've got expertise there that is going into the amp. But, wiring up an amp or having a custom PCB, there are lots of other people who can do that. Again, the thing that excites me about your amps is that I like the way you voice them and I like the way you dial them in. So that's ultimately, if someone buys an ALTA, they're getting, nearly, how long have you been playing guitar?
Yeah, since I was 14.
Since you were 14. So let's say 40 years of experience. That's the R&D right there. That's ultimately the thing that you're paying for with something like that. And it does sound abstract and a bit kind of, airy fairy, but that's the reality, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's, look, the whole aspect we were saying before, right? That playing guitar and doing this is, I think, intertwined and really important. It took me ages to figure out what a good guitar sound was. I remember in my 20s, I had no idea. I mean, I had my ADA MP1 and I thought that was, mate, I'm there. I've arrived,
Yeah, me too.
But I think back, I had no fucking idea. It might have sounded like a tin can. I had no idea. I just dial up the patch, turn it up loud, and go, oh yeah, that sounds awesome. But when I think about, what blows me away about the great players that, you can name anybody, right? Whether it's Eddie himself or a George Lynch or a Jakey Lee, or the list goes on and on, those guys. By and large, they had amazing guitar tones at an early age.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what is interesting about it is that they're actually simple rigs.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I was guilty of overcomplicating things very early with lots of gear and stuff. And all I actually needed was a freaking 2203 with a tube screamer in front of it. And I probably would have had a sound that was 10 times better than I ended up with, I
think what you need versus just like because I do this all the time. Like, this is why I've got so much shit here, is like, you just look at potential. And that's my trap, is I build a pedal board and I get hyper obsessed with something because I go like, but I could switch this with MIDI and then I could do that. And it's like, my job, like when I go out and do a gig, is capable with, like, if I'm doing I've got to do a gig on Saturday night through an actual amp, if you can believe that, Leon. I'm going to do an amp gig for a change. All I need is literally a guitar and an amp to do that gig. It's nothing else is required. A tuner probably is required. But I still have done those exact same gigs, but taken my MIDI pedal board with the HX Stomp and had to program different tones. And then I stress out for like the week before, like, fuck, I've got to get all this shit programmed just to do a gig.
Yep.
But the part of that is like, it's just like the potential and maximizing the potential and just being interested in it. And it's just that thing of like, where is necessity and where is just, this is fun and this is my obsession.
Yeah.
Like, where is the balance between that? That's my biggest struggle.
Yeah. I mean, do you use different rigs all the time, Troy? Because my understanding is you probably play a mix of different style of gigs.
Yeah. Yeah, like literally from everything. The majority of my gigs are duo gigs at the moment, which is the same rig every time, because it's a rig with an HX Stomp, an RC500 looper, and a MIDI switcher. So I do drum machine.
And that's an electric. You're playing it's an electric guitar gig, not acoustic.
It is an electric guitar gig now. It was originally an acoustic gig, but I've moved it to electric because I can rip more solos and have more fun.
Exactly.
But also, it is actually practical because I do a lot of looping and a lot of bass lines as well. So with an acoustic guitar, depending on what PA I was using, I was getting a lot of feedback. So it actually was a pragmatic decision. Let's focus. So that rig never comes out of, and I use a Jason Isbell Telecaster, like one of the ones that came out a couple of years ago. None of that gear leaves the case. It's just like twice a week, 3 times a week. It just goes in the back of my car. I do my gig, goes back in the case. No worries. Probably 2 times a year, I'll take the rig out and program a couple of different songs into it because I've got to find a USB cable somewhere, and it's not hard to do, but I just can't be fucked. But then
I get it.
But then, like, so I've done this year, and so okay, like this is I won't be too long with this, but like when I do the Dockers games, that's an AX8, and again, I've got so much gear, but the same AX8 patch I've used for like 5 years at the Dockers is just easy and it works, and I don't have to think about it. So no worries. And then everything else in between. So the last electric guitar gig I did was I did one in January and one in February. And the February one was direct, and then the January one was with a backline amp. So we're talking like in 6 months' time, 3 electric guitar gigs. Still getting paid, it's the whole thing. How much money do you think I've spent on pedals between that time, building a rig, just so that I knew I was ready for a gig the next time? Because I'll tell you, it's around $1,200.
Wow.
Because I had to buy a new pedal board. Actually, what happened is like I got really stressed out at the last gig because I knew I was going to use a backline amp, and I had all this gear, and I was like, fuck, but what am I going to do for this sound? What am I going to do for that sound? So I have a little thing that's like, it's actually prepared, grab and go. You got a pedal on there for a bit of drive and a tuner and all that sort of shit. Anyway, power supplies, and I just go mental with this stuff, but it's really fun. It's really, really fun. And that's the problem.
I've actually, I've just started, joined a mate of mine's covers band.
Yep.
And we just started gigging again. So it's
Did
fun.
You put some clips up of that?
I saw some pictures of you.
Maybe pictures.
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be right. But I've built this hybrid rig, and I'm actually really stoked with it. So we're on in-ears, and this is my first experience with in-ears.
Yep.
I'd only ever played old school loud on the back line, like you got a loud drummer, everyone turns their amps up. It's the same level, so the stage mix is good, and then you go. So these guys are on in-ears, and I started rehearsing with them. So they're doing silent rehearsals, which is like super convenient. So I did some captures of my amp in my quad cortex, and I set up, basically one preset with some scenes, and we're up and running. Great. Did the first gig like that as well. It was my first experience of no amp on stage and in-ears only, and I was left a bit unfulfilled.
Yes.
I really miss the interaction of a cabinet and a guitar.
Yeah.
Right.
Like that, you get that feed. Not. I don't mean just like getting feedback. I just mean that feedback loop of like it's
acoustic reinforcement.
Well, and mental reinforcement too. Like when you move somewhere, it's a completely interactive thing. Yeah, I understand that.
It's just particularly just for a lifetime of doing it, and I was just like, this was a new experience. And don't get me wrong, I'm really enjoying the in-ear experience, because it's just like, you can control your own mix, which is awesome. The vocals
super consistent.
Do you sing, Jason?
Backing vocals. Yeah. So, so I don't want to go back to that old world of just like, 110 decibels on stage and my hearing getting damaged even more. I don't want to do that. But what I'm doing now, and I've done a couple of gigs with this rig, is I'm back to using my amp. So I've got my ALTA, and I've just got a 2x12 cab. So it's a little bit more gear to carry, but not that much more. And I'm taking a line out off the speaker output and feeding that back into my quad cortex.
Okay.
And then into a cab block and some stereo delay, and that goes to front of house.
Nice.
So in my in-ears, I'm getting the front of house mix in stereo. So my guitar's nice and wide and sounds massive. It's all that matters, right? I'm getting
exactly.
I'm getting this awesome experience. But I'm getting a signal to front of house without having to worry about miking.
Yep.
But I'm still using my tube head, and because it's MIDI, when I change scenes on my quad cortex, my amp changes as well.
Yep.
Man,
Great
that's
way to do it.
Good rig. I'm really stoked with it.
Yeah.
And it's like a nice, I'd call it a hybrid rig, I guess. I got the idea of doing that. I got off a Pete Thorne rig rundown when he first got his quad cortex, and I think he did a rig rundown of his that he's in that what's that UK thing, that rock show?
The sort of touring, it's like a Rock of Ages style vibe.
I can't remember the name of the act, but he's done a few of those tours now, and he wanted to take his amps and you have them on stage, and they're kind of like, they want to have that vibe, of at least some noise on stage. And he was running a line out, so tapping off the speaker output. Still going into the cabinet, not a load box, but then running that back into the quad cortex, and then with a cab block and some stereo effects out the front of house. And I was like, man, I could do that. And I tried it. It's awesome.
Yep.
So that's what you need to do, man. Get your tube amp, Troy. Run it back into.
I could do that. I mean, like, I have all the bits to do it, but what you said is really important. No, I don't. So what I was actually thinking about doing, oh man, I've got so many things I was thinking about doing. I think the problem for me is I hate making more than one trip to my car. Like, very seriously. I know it sounds like very like a stupid thing to say, but like, particularly like if I've got to take PA, it's like I have to do it. But when you bring front of house PA, bring the desk, bringing the fold back, mixing the gig, playing guitar, doing backing vocals, doing the rhythm track, like all that sort of stuff. Like, my gigs vary depending on what the vibe is. So I mentioned my buddy Scott, who owns the Cornford. Like, we're going to go to Kalgoorlie, so 6-hour drive from Perth. 4 dudes in a Hilux. Shout out to Jay as well, who will listen to this. But 4 dudes in a Hilux. Front of house is there, but I'm bringing the desk, which I'm going to mix. We're all on ears for that gig, except for Scott, who plays guitar, just because it's like, you know, it's tight. Like you got to get, you're away for 3 days, you need luggage, you need guitars, you know, the whole shebang. We've got a drum kit out there, thankfully, so it's a little bit less. But anyway, there's just so much stuff to bring. And when I'm lead singer in that band too, and I'm mixing it, so there's just like so much to think about. So I go through this thing of like I get really big, and then I have to bring it really small to see what's like required, because there's just so many points of failure, and mostly I'm responsible for when the things fail as well. So, you know, some of the stuff with the guitar rigs, it's like, if I have a really complicated guitar rig, I might bring that along. But I did a gig recently, like even my pedal board that's really stable just died in the middle of a gig, and it's like, fuck. Like I can't rewire this in time. I literally water got on the looper pedal and shit started going.
I heard about that. I think you talked about it on one of the shows.
Yeah. So it's just one of those things. It's like I get real complicated with stuff, and then I get into these situations where I'm really fucked, and no one's there to solve my problems except for me. So I don't know. The lifting the gear is like annoying, and taking backups and stuff is really difficult. And I don't know. I think like I just satisfy my own interest with this. That's the main thing. Because I know like I don't need. I've done gigs like I probably told this story, but like I had my pedal board stolen out of my car 10 years ago, and knowing that like a week later I had to go do a run of country gigs, and I literally took a guitar and a head and a cabinet and not even a tuner. Like I think I might have had a tuner app on my phone, and that's all I went with, and it was completely fine. Like. That's playing a range of songs from distorted to clean. Just use the volume control on the guitar. I can cover it. Like I know within myself, I don't need anything to do a gig. It's just how I have all this fun planning stuff, and I think the planning's the thing that I like the most. And
it was interesting,
something.
Man. So great little piece of lore. You know, we talk about like figuring out, thinking you've got a great guitar sound, and doing a gig at, I think it was Amplifier Bar, and at the time I had a JMP1 and then a TCG Major, and of course the all-important BBE Sonic Maximizer.
Oh, you've got to have a Sonic Maximizer.
I'm fairly certain I was going out of the speaker-emulated output of the JMP1. So I don't know anything. You know, just, it's a little less harsh, so I'll use that. I was running that into the effects return of a head and a 2x12, and, you know, this is great because MIDI switching and all that kind of stuff. Did this gig and hanging out with Troy, and he just kind of, you know, it was like very offhand thing. He was like, yeah, man, it was cool. You know, I think you should probably just like maybe try do a few gigs where you just use a head, because like, you know, like it might just sound a bit more appropriate or something like that. And I was like, okay. And then like just, you know, took a DSL to the next gig and was like, this is so much better. Like I went from, you know, all this stuff happening on stage to like a wah, a tuner, and a DSL, and that evolved into like a wah, a tuner, a boost, and then a delay in the loop, and then bringing a dual rectifier and a 4-button. So I had this stupid rig, but you know that I think was the point in time where I was like, oh no, I actually have to get like, I don't need the world's greatest guitar sound. I just need something that is good.
You need to be able to play
do the gig.
By the way, Jason was with you till he said DSL.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on how you dial it. What channel in the DSL, and how have you got it set up?
So I know the accepted wisdom on the internet is green channel, overdrive mode, gain all the way up. No. Let me tell you guys, what you want to do. You've got two options here, and it all revolves around what you do with the deep switch. So if you have the deep switch and mid boost, mid cut, don't even bother. Leave it out. You want the mids. If you've got the deep switch in, you only need the bass at about like 1 or 2. If you've got it out, then just set everything at like 1 o'clock, but ultra gain 1. Like, you know, the lower gain
gain mode of the gain channel,
gain at about 2 or 3. You don't need anything else. And those amps, because I was using Ryan's 50 watt one, you got to get the master up as well. They actually kind of wake up a bit. So yeah, and presence control all the way off. That was my hack. Because otherwise they're a bit fizzy. But yeah. And it was totally fine.
Green channel. You're wrong, mate. Amateur hour.
But yeah, most people use a green channel because it sounds like a 2203, right?
Well, this is it. So my whinge about those amps is that the gain channel's just, there's too much gain, and it's too bassy.
It's like, stupid.
It's like I don't know. Like it's got so many gain stages.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
I have come around on the JVM because I feel like the JVM gain channels, they've got some really nice filtering up front and they're tight and yeah. But, I'd often use an SD1 in front of the DSL. So, gain at almost minimum, but then you're kind of filtering it with a pedal. And, yeah, man, that rig did a lot of fun gigs with that rig.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm because I've got this gig in 2 days. I'm like, which of the 14 amps that I have shall I take for this gig? And then I went to Leon.
The evil robot?
No, because that's being fixed at the moment.
Right.
For an unnamed project, I was using it a couple of weeks ago, and the channel loudness A and B switch it won't swap channels. So I dropped that off to be fixed. Oh, I mean, sorry. I know we're going like hell long, so we'll wrap it up. I promise. But Jason, I bought an old Guyatone valve amp a couple of days ago.
Okay, cool.
For $250 with a with a 4x12 crate cabinet that had the speakers changed out for T75s and K100s, and a 1x15.
Oh, wow.
So I got a deal. Like that don't happen that often.
Bro.
But
that's inspiring because the Guyatone's basically a twin, right?
Apparently, yeah. So I dropped the twin off. The the seller had chopped the power lead off it because it was fraying or something. So I couldn't even plug it in. But it's being all serviced here at the moment, and we'll see what that kind of comes back to life as. So I took that and the evil robot in basically. To answer your question though, I went to Leon's house while he was away 2 weeks ago. Said g'day to his wife. Had a fat chat. And, just picked up a Soldano Astro 20. So maybe I'll take that. Maybe I'll take this SV20. Maybe I'll take the Synergy 30. Why do I have so many amps?
Bro, the blue mode on the Astro It
was good. I like
really good.
Yeah. I've got...
well, that's a pretty versatile... that's a pretty versatile head, right? And that...
Yeah.
I do like, that... Again, I kind of call it a hybrid style, and obviously in boutique amps, right, we can see this tech is now making its way through the product line.
Yep.
Yeah, it's awesome.
The Friedman IRX, IRD, the Synergy stuff has now got that. And, my interest in that is probably pretty obvious because I could see that from a product development perspective, having something in that realm is important.
Yep.
I think people will still buy tube heads, valve heads, whatever you want to call them.
Yeah, man, because
right?
Think about it. As a hobby, compared to like hot rod cars or anything else, relatively inexpensive.
Yeah,
exactly. I've said, I'm not the first man. I've said that before, right? I mean, people look at the collection of gear I've got in this room and they go, "Oh, you're crazy," blah blah. It's like, man, there's so many hobbies that cost a lot more than the shit that's in this room. Don't you worry about that. But I like when you've got even bands like Slipknot and how big they are under pressure to, from a touring perspective, to minimize the footprint of the the equipment that they're having to truck around.
Yeah,
that for people that actually need to move gear around for gigging, freight is important.
Yeah,
the cost of freight is critical now. It's just so expensive. So these hybrid products and this kind of idea of digital power amp sim with cab emulation and so on.
Mm-hmm.
When I think about it from a product development perspective, it's important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
The IRX IRD stuff, by the way, like they're awesome.
Yeah.
My little board has a IRX on it at the moment. And I used it for a gig. A different sort of gig that I had to do actually a little while ago. And that sounded really awesome. I wanted to actually use that for the Dockers games, but it doesn't have an XLR out on at the moment. And sure they could provide me with a DI, but sometimes I forget to ask these things. So I just go with what works,
That's awesome. Well, boys, we're about to hit the 2-hour mark on this one, so we should probably wrap. This may have become
Todd out of here. Sorry.
Yeah, Poochie was returned to his home, died on the way to his home planet. This might end up being 2 episodes, which I'm totally okay with. Jason, before we go, what would you like the people of the internet to know about what you've got coming up? Where can they? I'll put all the information in the video description. What are you stoked about over the next 6 to 12 months?
Well, I'm super excited to bring out the second production amp for Headfirst, right? So the ALTA's been out for a while now, more than a year, and it's time to bring out, to start to fill out the product line. So that's going to come, and I said by the time this comes out, we should have actually announced it. So it's going to be next week, actually.
Awesome.
So I'm going over to visit my friend Simon Hosford tomorrow.
Awesome.
And we're gonna shoot some video and capture some audio of him playing through the amp.
Monster. Which
is cool. Yeah, it was always way more appealing than having me play through it again. So that's going to happen, and then I've just touched on the, this kind of idea of smaller footprint style stuff. I'm just going to show you this 1 second, and you can get an idea of what. It's probably hard.
It's a bit dark.
To see this.
Yes.
What is that?
That's a 19-inch rack. Michael Torin.
It's a 19-inch
Where
rack.
Is he? He heard it come out.
I think I might have one of these sitting here.
Let's just imagine.
We'll see.
Yep.
But there's a certain guitar player who's using my gear at the moment, who I've already talked about a bunch of times on this live stream, who's very interested in such a product.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So that's cool. And the reason I'm super excited about kind of moving into that style of, having that style of product in the wheelhouse is because it's a step into that hybrid world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Which is
even without a digital back end to begin with, it's still it's a pathway there,
Can I just ask as well, what's up with the live streams, man? You've left me hanging for 6 months.
I know, dude. So bad.
Do you know how much little work I got done last year? Because I would leave my house because it's perfect. I'm literally leaving the cafe. I'm driving to the studio. Oh, what's happening on YouTube at the moment? Oh, Jason's got a live stream. I'll just put this on during the car trip. And then all of a sudden 2 hours go by. Haven't done any work. So I need that.
I want, it's a symptom of how busy I've become, I think. And it's just so, you got to carve. I mean, you guys are doing it, right? You got to carve it so much time aside to do it. Especially if you want to, like when you're going live and you've got to kind of prepare for.
And you've got to be on.
You've got to be on. It makes it look like, I don't know if it looks like that, but you can't do it off the cuff because you don't know what questions you're going to get. You don't know if anyone's even going to be listening. So if I've got a guest on, I've got to prepare.
Yeah,
I have 20 questions sitting there ready to go, and I tried to make them relevant to that person, based on who they are, what they've done, what they're doing, and that kind of stuff. So it does, I do want to do it more.
Yeah. Well, maybe once the next product in the lineup is out, you can do a little Q&A stream, and we can come and bug you on there.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Maybe I should. I'll restart by getting you guys on. How about that?
There you go.
Yeah, that'd be awesome, man.
Done deal.
We'll just have a hang.
All right. Well, we'll do that. And for now, we're going to pull up stumps here. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason Tong, Headfirst Amps. Information will be in the video description. Thanks for joining us, man. Amazing. So generous with your time. And
no
we can't wait to do this again.
Yeah.
All right. Peace out, man. Peace out, everybody. Bye.